So we're not going to use this.
Yeah.
All right, comrades, welcome to this conference of unpaid benefits, crisis of unpaid benefits. On behalf of the Unpaid Benefits Campaign, my name is Julie. I variously occupied positions on the, I don't know what we don't really have formal positions in terms of the UBC, but the steering committee chair for a number of years and co-founded this movement several years ago. And we're very, very happy that all of you are here. We welcome you to this venue. Thank you for taking the time and for being interested enough to be able to participate in what we think is a very important meeting here to discuss a real crisis. We don't use the word crisis lightly. When you start looking at the situation with unpaid benefits, it is a crisis of massive proportions. In a country where we have some of the most highly unequal socio-economic relations, where a large section of our population is in poverty, where a large section of our population cannot afford the basic services and basic goods of life, food, housing, all sorts of other things, education. We have a situation in which those who do have the money, in this case, fund administrators, are sitting on a huge, huge pile. Estimates now are upwards of 80 billion rand. It's almost unimaginable. I think that amount of money is sitting there in unclaimed, as they call it, unclaimed benefits. We call them unpaid benefits. It's not that they haven't been unclaimed. Many people have claimed their benefits, they simply haven't been paid their benefits. So we like to use the term unpaid benefits. So there is a crisis of not just the fact that many people, families, ex-workers have passed on their dependents, have not been able to access these pensions, they have not been able to enjoy what should be theirs, rightfully theirs, as families, as others, extended families in many cases. But we have a situation in which, as the Unpaid Benefits Campaign, we have argued for a long time, and you will be hearing much about this afternoon from the panel around the causes of this crisis and what really is behind this. And I'm not going to go any much further, but just to say that in our country, we know who the culprits are. We know who the people who are not wanting to move on these things, because there's much money to be made in that pile of cash, isn't there? The more you have, anyone knows when you're sitting with piles of cash, you make money. Yeah, you get interest, you get all sorts of other kinds of things. So whenever there's large amounts of money to be made, oftentimes there's very slow movement in terms of funds in the ways they should be. So that crisis, comrades, will be discussed this afternoon, and the causes of that crisis. Each of you in your pack has a conference program. So I'm just going to quickly go through this program very briefly. But before I do that, I wanted to give our comrades who is the team that's the logistics and planning for the venue, as well as this entire program. You've probably run into her already. And Jackie wanted to just address a couple of logistical issues before we get started. Jackie.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so I'll be very brief. To begin with, and I think importantly, bathrooms. Bathrooms are out the door to your right, and there's a sign. You'll see a staircase. There's the bar, but just after the bar area, that's where you have your bathrooms. Okay, they are marked, but if you have any issues, you can ask myself or any one of my colleagues that you saw at the registration table. They will be able to help you. The Wi-Fi code is on the wall. You're able to use that. For the guests who are staying on the property as well, the Wi-Fi code is in your room, so please make use of that. On the floor, and I asked to be very careful, we've put plug points to be able to charge your phones or your laptop, right? And so you are responsible for your device, your phone or your laptop, but please plug it in. And when we do walk up and down the aisles, please can we just be careful? We don't want anybody getting hurt. In the section here to the front, to my right, you'll see that there is a camera set up. Please may we avoid coming round the front and walk behind the camera away from, and also not to damage and the positioning of the camera. So as we walk around and away from the camera. Our coffee station is stationed behind the curtains here. I do kindly request us to go right around instead of going through the curtains. The only reason is that because of the positioning of our banners, there's a bit of a step or the slope there. We don't want anybody getting hurt if we can go right around and not go through the curtains. We're doing away with single-use plastic. So you'll see, yes, our juices still come in the plastic bottles, but for water on either side of the room, to your left and to your right, there are water coolers. Please, you can stand up, make use of those. We've accommodated the tables in the front so that they don't have to walk behind and, go behind everybody else. So that's why they're only the water jugs in the front. But for the rest of us, we can make use of the water coolers. The water is quite cool there. For the guests that are staying on this property and at Euro, right? And I've spoken to those guests. In the morning, please can we ask that you not lock your rooms? You will keep your keys with you. Just leave your rooms unlocked so that housekeeping can go around and clean that up. Only after lunch, you can go to your room, have it checked. If it has been cleaned, you can lock it again, but keep your keys with you at all times, okay? They do stress that the spare keys are very far. They may not have as many spare keys. So please just be careful with your keys and keep your keys at hand. Breakfast for our guests. After the reception, I think a few meters down, there will be a sign that will indicate the hall for breakfast. Our lunch and dinner will be served in the room where we had lunch this afternoon. And then finally, please can, in terms of security for the property, we really request that people not go out of the property and come in and go out, right? So just to keep the security and the sanctity of security for the property and everybody on it, we really ask that people refrain from going out. If you really need to, we're not saying you can't, but just let the reception know that you would like to go out and more or less what time you'll be back. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and welcome again. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, so we're running a little bit behind schedule, but that is fine because we have quite a bit of flexibility. And as it turns out, one of our panelists, we were originally, as you see from the program today, we were going to have 4 panelists. Unfortunately, Comrade Briggs has had to deal with some things unexpectedly, and he's going to try to make his way here, but we're not going to count on him being here this afternoon. So we'll have a little bit more time for the 3 panelists. So this afternoon, that's exactly what we're going to do. This is around the causes and the history of the crisis. I will be introducing the panelists just now, and they will address some of those various aspects of looking at the history of this crisis, the causes of it, and we will then be having engagements from all of you, asking questions, making points, and engaging with the panelists on that. I think it's going to be a very useful and very fruitful engagement. After that is finished, there's rest time for everybody, just to those of you who just want to do whatever you need to do. Before there will be a documentary film showing of the big debate, which was recorded a few months ago around the issue of unpaid benefits. For those of you, some of you here were part of that show, others might not have seen it. And then there'll be supper to end the day. We will then, I'm not going to go through the entire program. Each day we'll recap and you'll look at the issues, but you can see that essentially the program follows the title of this conference, which is Cause, Consequence, and Correction. So we're dealing first with the causes, then we're going to look at the consequences. What has this crisis produced? And this is where we're going to listen to your stories and people from the ground, in particular from the Unpaid Benefits Campaign and the branches there, as well as ex-worker collective. Some of you come from other organizations. And just to say that, it's not surprising, but it's disappointing, comrades, that we invited of over 8 government departments to this conference. 8 different government departments. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Comrade Nick, 2 of them are going to be represented?
Unfortunately, I think only one.
Only one. Department of Health. So the Department of Treasury, the Department of Labor, Department of Social Development, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, which is the entire regulatory body, looks like they're also. This is indicative, comrades, of the attitude that government has. Here is an opportunity, civil society organization creating a space for engagement and for things, and they do not even have the courtesy to come and engage with us. It's very, very disappointing, but it's very predictable at the same time. The same can be said of most of the fund administrators, those administrators that are holding these pension funds. You all know who they are. Amongst them are Old Mutual, Sanlam, Liberty, Alexander Forbes, and the name that goes on, MIPFA, all sorts of other fund administrators. The only fund administrator that is here that is represented is Liberty. Thank you to Liberty for coming. Once again, and just to say that the team tried for the last 2 to 3 months, follow up contacts, trying to get people to come, and they still do not respond positively to these invitations. So this shows you the kind of mountain that we have to climb, comrades, to try to put this onto the agenda, as well as to try to make others listen, both in governments as well as the administrators, to what people on the ground are saying around this crisis. And then finally, after we've listened and talked about the consequences of this crisis throughout tomorrow, the final day, we'll also then be looking at some of the ways forward and correction. In other words, what needs to be done? What kinds of things can we do? Understanding that we are both limited in our resources, both human and financial, but nonetheless, the fact that we're here is a victory in itself. And on that note, I wanted to say a big, big thank you from the Unpaid Benefits Campaign to Open Secrets. Open Secrets is our partner here. Open Secrets, for those of you who don't know, is a non-governmental, an NGO that's based in Cape Town, which has existed for many years and which has done incredibly good work on a range of different areas of research and advocacy around uncovering the past and corruption and malfeasance and things where people are not doing what they should be doing, and have been very supportive of the unpaid benefits struggle. And okay, comrades, the one thing that I'll just say, the house rules, cell phones off, comrades, silent, off, please. Just if you haven't done it, just do it. Don't be embarrassed. It's fine. You can do it now. It's more embarrassing if it goes off, because we will call you out, comrades. Okay? Please, it's just respect to everyone to do that. So anyway, just to say to Open Secrets, thank you, comrades, for all the work that you've done. It's been very difficult tasks to pull this together. Comrades don't know what goes on behind the scenes oftentimes, and it's a very thing. So thanks to Open Secrets, and thanks also to all the comrades from the UBC as well. All right, so comrades, without any further delays, I'm going to introduce the panel that will be speaking to you this afternoon. We have right to my immediate left, and I say that with all ideological respect, because Comrade Rosemary's always been on the left. Comrade Rosemary Hunter. Those of you might have heard of her because she's quite famous in the pensions saga. She was the deputy registrar of pensions fairly years back. She was the one who blew the whistle on the massive cancellation of funds and was victimized and went all the way to the Constitutional Court to fight that battle. And so she's a hero of ours in the unpaid benefits circles, and we welcome her. She has been an attorney also. And Rosemary's been an attorney for a long time, working on unpaid pensions as well as many other areas. And from what she tells me, she's also going to be entering into the world of writing soon and telling us different. And we look forward to the things that she will produce on that front. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you.
And then I wouldn't say further to the left, maybe Ariella. Okay, in the middle there, Comrade Ariella Scher. Ariella is with Open Secrets, but also previously worked with the unpaid struggle with the Center for Applied Legal Studies, which is at Wits University. Ariella is also an attorney, and she brings also experience and knowledge around these issues, and she will be speaking to some of that. Welcome, Ariella. And finally, on the far Haneen Drake. Haneen is also an attorney of note, and Haneen is someone who's worked on, including presently, giving our local governments a hard time with regards to their contributions to pension funds, and is a co-founder and member of Pension Justice, which is a legal outfit of concerned attorneys and legal practitioners who are concerned enough to come and begin to address the issue of pension issues and pension justice specifically. And they're doing incredibly good work as we speak, and will continue to do so. And Haneen and Pension Justice are also part of the Unpaid Benefits Campaign. Welcome, Haneen. All right, so I'm going to now, I said to the panelists initially we had 4, but I'm going to give you a little bit more time. You have up to 20, 25 minutes apiece. Please take that time as you see fit. If you don't need it, then that's fine. And then we'll come back and engage in questions and comments. Who would like to move first? Haneen? Okay, go ahead, Haneen.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Carl. Can you hear me? Yes. Good to be here. We've really discussed how to approach, but maybe we should approach it with the type of conversation. What I propose is I'll attempt to set the scene. Many of you know why we're here and what led to this historic crisis. But it might be useful to give some perspective and personal stories to aspects of what contributed to the crisis and attempts to resolve it. And what struck me in contemplating these issues before today as well is how remarkably this entire system has been rigged against members. You'll know pension funds exist for members. So to have it in this particular issue operate so drastically against members is really alarming, as well as the delay in resolving it. So broadly, I think there can be different ways of approaching it, but there's probably about 3 themes of causes that contributed to especially the historic unpaid claims crisis. The first one is structural factors. Society was rigged against many people. And I'll briefly unpack that in conversation with the panelists if necessary. The second thing is structural factors within the pension industry. The pension industry itself was set up in a way that consciously or unconsciously or in combination operated against members in this particular context. And then the third is behavior of the various stakeholders and how people acted or didn't act or cared or didn't care, mostly didn't care, to resolve or to do their part so that the system can work to the benefit of members. Is there any other category that you think we should address? So on societal factors, especially pre-constitution, society is set up against people who work in a mine for 6 months and go home to the Transkei. In an era before internet, where you can't just easily track someone. So obviously, apartheid and inequality are massive contributors. Sets the scene for this crisis to be able to unfold. In that time, there's no constitution, there's no real protection of human rights of most of the population, and there's financial insecurity. So what do we mean by that? People often don't have bank accounts necessarily, or cannot easily access a bank branch. They're not part of the financial system. They don't probably have even funeral cover. So they're not engaging with the financial system and often not aware through lack of member education, beneficiary education, of what pension fund they even belong to, when were contributions made. Maybe they've retained a few cases, maybe not, maybe that got lost over time. And they might not even appreciate that a fund is a separate legal entity set up with its own board of governance, trustees to manage that fund. They think when they leave employment, they get everything that's owed to them, and that's it. And they don't realize, because no one told them, that there's more money sitting in a pension fund separately that you need to claim. And that's partly where employers, I think, were also complicit. The second part is, as I've touched on, the migrant labor system in particular has contributed to this problem. So people move about throughout the country. They go and work on it, for example, a mine for 6 months. They go back home, or they go to Lesotho, Swaziland, a different country. Again, perhaps not realizing there's still money owed to them. And they never found. They move around a bit, and people don't take a lot of care, attention, and resources in order to find them. And so, as part of that, there was also limited labor and pension protection for workers. Right? There was no pension funds adjudicator in place at the time. Where do you even go to assert your rights in the 70s and 80s, or even earlier? I mean, I was alarmed to see on some queries from UBC, there's people with passport numbers, who seek to claim unpaid funds. And that goes back quite far. So I'm using 70s and 80s by way of example, but of course it goes back a whole lot further. And then there's limited access to information, right? This era without internet, the fund doesn't educate members, the employer doesn't educate members, and you don't have financial resources to even enforce your rights. The ordinary man on the street, even today, with the Constitution and everything, and tribunals, cannot really afford an attorney to go and litigate in court for them. So what do? Even you realize you're sitting in Lesotho, in a village, or in a city, and you realize that a fund in Joburg owes you money. Even start accessing this. And so the system already is rigged against the individual, the worker, the former worker, and their family. And so then, if we look at the pension funds industry, it gets even worse. You stack another layer of inequality on top of that. They'll reference the disparity between the large administrators, right? There's big companies who run pension funds. There's administrators who run pension funds. Asset managers invest the fund's assets. Often they are connected to the same group of companies. So all of these powerful corporations are running massive amounts of investment money. And again, an individual, you're just a member with your benefit, which you worked very hard for, that you don't realize has effectively disappeared. So that structure is also against you. Then there's some inherent conflicts in the financial system. For example, asset managers and administrators get paid to do their jobs for the fund. An asset manager often gets paid, for example, as a percentage of the assets that they manage. So there's a conflict in that, obviously, if you're sitting on a 10 billion rand assets that you're managing, and you have to pay out claims, that's going to reduce. And if you get a percentage on the 10 billion becomes 8 or 7 or 6 billion because of payouts, for example, then your percentage and your pay as the asset manager will be a lot less because the assets that you manage is less. And that's a common payment structure of asset managers. Administrators often get paid per member, X rand, 15 rand, 20, whatever it is. So again, once you pay someone, remember the Pension Funds Act says you're actually a member of the fund until your benefit has been paid. So even if someone left employment in the 70s and they're still owed an unpaid benefit, they're still actually a member of that fund in law. But once you're not a member anymore, that administrator loses that payment for that member because it was, for example, 12 rand per member per month. So there's inherent conflicts set up that set the scene to make it easier to benefit those who run funds at the cost of members. Another thing that makes it even worse is these kind of one-stop shop funds. If you have an asset manager and an administrator and maybe even not really trading agents, but other service providers, consultants, for example, they all sit under one company, and sometimes they can make a very attractive commercial offer to the fund because they already have resources in-house. So it's cheaper often for a fund to use the one-stop shop like that, but then you have everyone sitting under one umbrella, and that just heightens the disparity even more. And then we must also remember that pension law did not historically really assist members. There was no adjudicator until 1998, 2000. Employers were not required to give a lot of information to funds. So a big contributing factor to why the funds often don't have the member records is, yes, the fund should have done more to the information, but funds also rely on their employers to give them the information, right? The fund doesn't engage with workers directly. So every month, an employer has to pay a pension contribution for all the workers that belong to the fund, And the Pension Fund Act requires the employer to give a whole list, a whole schedule requires everyone's name and a bunch of other details. Because the fund must know on whose behalf are you paying, to whose member record does this amount go, and so forth. But often that information from the employer, especially I think before the 90s when Regulation 33 came out, was often just a name and an amount and not much more. So how do you find someone in the 80s on a name? You maybe don't even have an ID number, you have no contact details. So that also contributes to the cause. So the employer doesn't give all the information to the fund. The fund also doesn't demand that information from the employer. And the law does not require, or did not for a very long time require them to do that. Regulation 33 came in and was in place for a few decades, which required a bit more information. But still today, employers don't give all of that. You often have to fight with an employer to give the full details so that the fund knows how to allocate the funds. Regulation 33 required a bit more. I think it required an ID number at least and one or two other things. But most recently, now from 2023 onwards, there's a new conduct standard out by the FSCA, which it now dramatically improves what kind of information an employer must give a fund every month. And that includes the member's ID, address, contact details if available, cell phone number, email, and even tax number. Because, often SARS gets what it needs to get. So before a fund makes a payment, it talks to SARS and see if tax must be paid on that. So all of that helps now to make it people identifiable and hopefully to avoid going forward this massive problem of unpaid benefits. But of course, it didn't have to only be required in 2023. It could have been required in 1980 already to give this level of information that would have improved members' records with the fund. The other problem is that, often we talk about the fiduciary duties of trustees who run the pension fund. And we say, well, you didn't keep proper member records and you're required to, because what it means to have a fiduciary duty is you have to take care. You have to act in good faith. You can't just do what you want. You have to avoid conflicts of interest and so on. But that's quite a broad concept. Now, when you go to a fund at that time and you say to reach your fiduciary duties, it's not like there was a law or a rule that said you must keep a member record and it must say A, B, C, D, E. If that was in place at the time, many of us wouldn't be here right now. So now the only thing that you had at the time is fiduciary duties, but now you first have to fight about, okay, what it means to take proper care includes surely you must keep proper member records, but then you're in a fight about what that means. So it would have been helpful to have more clarity at an earlier stage. And then on the third topic, behavioral factors, one must look at, and I think the Secrets report and Rosemary's whistleblowing, it's done, it's taken remarkable strides to expose behavioral factors. But there's all stakeholders in place, and please jump in where you want to, that every single role player was behaving at the time in a way, again, that does not have members' best interests at heart. So I talked about the funds, behavior, inadequate record keeping, limited to no member education. We know about administrators and service provider behavior. Some of them are discussed in the Open Secrets report. We have, for example, the administrator of Alexander Forbes, who invested, I don't know, Rose, if you want to speak about bulking, who invested a bunch of money and just took secret profits from it instead of giving the profits back to members. And that's just one example that's not necessarily directly related to unpaid benefits. Some of it might be. And you can't, that is the breach of even in law, that's a breach of fiduciary duties. But people have been behaving in a way that does not, that benefits themselves over the members. So employers, again, failure to educate members on benefits and ensure they are paid. Your employer HR should ideally sit with you and make sure you have the documents, you understand how to give the fund a proper claim form, help you with it. And then unfortunately we have the regulator, the FSC and the FSDA. The cancellation project that you knew about when the FSCA cancelled thousands of funds that still had assets sitting there to the benefit of members. Cancelling is maybe a casual word, deregistering, which means the fund can't do business, so the fund can't make payments, but they have assets sitting there. And maybe, Rose, you can expand a bit on that if it's not.
Thank you. I should stand up. Thank you. It's lovely being back with you. Just before I talk about cancellations, I just want to say it's always, whenever I come to a BBC meeting, and it's not very often anymore, I feel like I'm back with my family, because when I was going through my nightmare of litigating against the Financial Services Board and National Treasury, we had all huge, big legal teams, and I was asking my lawyers to do most of their work for free and losing it and so on. It was very tough, but that was around the time that the UBC started. And UBC was with me and came to the Constitutional Court, and it meant a huge amount for me. And I've just been admiring now from afar the extraordinary work that you've done. And I also want to just, before I get back to this point, just say,
yeah, you could just hold it a little bit closer.
Closer, okay. Yeah, I just want to, before I get back to the main point, is to say, to give you credit. It may be that all these administrators and regulators don't want to come and talk to you. Is Liberty here now? Hi, welcome. Okay. Liberty, which was one of the first targets of the UBC, and lots of toy. Liberty, after it got a new CEO, went and hired, 70 people or so? Records and start finding people. It was obviously these are things that Liberty should have done years ago, but Liberty has put in a huge amount of resources. I read online, you've just recently been in the Eastern Cape, I think, finding people and paying. So I just want to give you Liberty credit, but also to give the UBC credit, because all this publicity that you have generated, and it's not all been toying and marching, you've had meetings with administrators. You've asked to work together. So that has been a very good impact. I mean, you've had a high impact. So it may be that someone doesn't want to talk to you, or the FSCA doesn't want to talk to you. In fact, you have been having meetings with the FSCA, some of it. But you've had an enormous impact, and I want to give you credit for that. And to tell you that when the FSCA is talking about 85 billion, that now includes insurance proceeds, because this momentum is going. So now other organizations in the financial services industry are now starting to look for people who are entitled to the proceeds of insurance policies. So a couple of the insurance companies are saying they keep checking on the Home Affairs database if somebody has died, and if that person had a life insurance policy, they try to proactively go and find the dependents, people who are listed as beneficiaries of that life insurance policy. So that's you guys, and I think we all owe you a big debt. Back to the question of the cancellations. So most of you know the story, but there are a few faces I don't recognize, so I'll tell it quickly. I was appointed as Deputy Registrar of Pension Funds in 2013 for a 3-year term. And when I arrived there, it was towards the end of a big project. There were a whole lot of funds which were registered, but they weren't sending in their annual financial statements. They weren't. Many of them just didn't have boards of trustees. And this often happened because employers would move their employees to an umbrella fund, and then they would think that the old fund, all that money had gone to the new fund, but they didn't realize there were a lot of unclaimed benefits, and there was still business that needed to be finalized, and nobody was bothering. So these funds became dormant. They had no trustees. And the FSCA decided to embark on what is a good idea, is to start a project to clean up so that funds weren't just sitting there, not being looked after. Unfortunately, the way the FSB did it for most of the project was to appoint as sort of trustees many people who had conflicts of interest. They appointed, I remember when, this was before Liberty became the good guys, they appointed one person from Liberty administration, who's head of pension fund administration. She was the trustee of 500 funds at once. And how could she, when she's supposed to be running the pension funds, looking after the interests of her employer, and most of these funds, I think many of them anyway, didn't have assets like shares and so on. They just had policies of insurance, so that when somebody died, then they would put in a claim to Liberty, and Liberty would pay the money, but the pension fund would pay the person who's supposed to get that money. But when you don't have a trustee, nobody's making the claim. Nobody's trying to find those people who are not entitled to the money. And so the FSCA just put these trustees in place, people in, and said to them, give us a certificate, the fund's got no assets and liabilities. And often they would put in certificates declaring that there's no assets and no liabilities, but they weren't looking that there's actually a policy of insurance, and people who, that's a benefit, that's an asset worth something. But even my colleagues at the FSB were saying, oh, but that's not an asset, there's no assets there, and let's deregister these funds. And I arrived at the tail end, and I asked whether they wanted me to sign to deregister a bunch of funds, and I asked, but where's the records of what happened to the money? Did everybody get paid out and so on? And then trouble began, and I had a lot of pushback, disciplinary inquiry, and all sorts of things, and then I started the litigation to try to make sure that this project was done properly. But at the end of it, I did lose the case, but it did have a lot of publicity, and the FSCA, I think, the current regulator, I think, is much more careful. They check a lot. They do a lot more checking before they'll deregister a fund to see what's happened to the assets and liabilities. But to the best of my knowledge, they have refused to go and look at the old ones. The funds have been deregistered. They said, well, the court didn't order us to go and look at all those old pensions. We're not already gone to court to have the deregistration set aside. Alexander Forbes refuses to do that. And in fact, National Treasury got Income Tax Act Amendment 3 that would allow National Alexander Forbes to go and pay secret profit monies to former members without re-establishing the fund, getting the fund re-registered. Who decides who to get what. That's the interest here. And yeah, there are all sorts of other strange things. Why didn't the FSCA push all these other administrators of assets and liabilities? As far as I know, it's only Liberty's gone to court to fix the problem. And yet, it was not only Liberty that had funds that they were administering that had assets and liabilities, but these funds were deregistered. So those things are very odd. But that's just the cancellation project. There are so many other things that regulators should be.
Rose Wally, do you want to use this as a segue to talk about underwritten funds?
Okay. I wanted to explain actually. Okay, I was just talking about, maybe I should draw a picture that I don't see. Maybe we should get some of the Liberty people to come and explain this better than me. That's familiar. You know, if you're an employer and you've got 5 employees, you might be a responsible employer and you want to fund only you with your 5 employees, 6 people, because it's just too expensive. So what that a financial advisor would advise the employer, listen, you can establish a fund. You can have just 6 people, maybe they'll be more later. And the pension fund is a legal entity. Now, if you're a big fund like the Eskom pension fund, you'll buy shares and you'll buy properties and you'll invest your money in various to manage your but you still got your trustees and they're deciding who gets appointed as investment manager and so on. And you work out a strategy. But when you're a tiny little fund with just 6 people, you can't afford all of those things. So what you do is you take an insurance policy. Let's say it's an insurance company. And you form an agreement. It's called a policy. That's what a policy is. It's an agreement. And your agreement as a fund with the and in return for that, the insurance company says, I will pay the benefits that the fund has to pay when those benefits become due. So when Joe leaves your employment, he retires, he goes home, he's entitled to, say, a lump sum. The insurance company will pay that lump sum. In most cases, they'll pay directly to Joe, but sometimes they'll do it through the fund. This fund, this little fund, doesn't have shares and property and all those things. It just has one asset. That's a policy of insurance. But it's a very valuable asset because this agreement with the insurance company is the basis on which you're making provision for people's retirement. And then the problem in the cancellations project was, and there were thousands of these little funds, and they stopped being popular when big financial services providers started creating umbrella funds, multi-employer funds. And the employers started moving their employees into these multi-employer funds because then you get economies of scale and lots of assets, and then the big fund can hire asset managers and do all of those good things. But lots of these little funds were left behind. And some of them had money, some of them had assets and unclaimed benefits, some of it was surplus money, but it would belong to, it should have been shared out among the members or something like that. But in some cases, there wasn't actual cash, there wasn't actual assets, which was the policy of insurance, but that policy gives you the right to claim money. So if somebody hasn't been paid, they were a member, and they left, maybe they went to Mozambique, and because, we have a problem in this country, culture, we don't like to talk about death. And so often members of retirement funds, they don't tell their husband or wife that if I die, there's money there for you. So if a member dies and the wife is in Mozambique, that wife may never know that there was money. But the pension fund should know that there was money due and should have asked the insurance company to pay that money to the spouse or the dependents of Joe who has died. But if you don't have trustees anymore, and the regulator is just putting one person working for the fund administrator to be the trustee, do you think that person's going to fight for Joe's money? No. And that's the problem. I think in many cases, I can see even I was working at the regulator, the Financial Services Board, many people were saying, but these funds have got no asset. And that's because they're wholly underwritten. This policy is an asset. It's like a check. There's money there you can claim. It looks like a piece of paper, but it has value. So it's very important that everybody understands when a fund is wholly underwritten, that doesn't mean it hasn't got assets. It's got assets. And it's very important that each retirement fund has its own board that is going to fight for its members, because that's what they're for.
Please, comrades, turn your phones off. Put them on silent.
Speak a bit now on some of the work that UBC and other partners did over the past, say, 5 years, and attempts to turn around all of these effects of the system that Helene outlined. So in 2019, Open Secrets published a report in which they detailed this whole cancellation project that Rosemary has outlined and looked into the actual extent to which the project had affected existing funds and what the effects of that project had been. And what Open Secrets found at the time was that mostly between 2007 and 2013, but even until 2019, that over 6,000 pension funds had been cancelled when most of them still had some form of asset, even if that asset was, as Rosemary had explained, one insurance policy. But again, it remains quite a valuable asset in many instances. And again, that most of those cancellations had been done by people who were seriously conflicted, whether or not they acted directly for the pension fund administrators or had some other connection that meant that they were conducting these cancellations when they at the same time had other interests that they might have been catering to. And so the whole process was incredibly problematic. And again, as a result of some of the background that Helene has outlined, all of this was essentially going by uncommented on because so many of the beneficiaries dated back so many years. And often the beneficiaries were not aware of what was happening because they weren't able to say, I'm a member or my descendant is a member of this particular fund. So when you don't know what fund you are a member of, you don't know if the fund that you're a member of has been cancelled. So once Open Secrets had published this, there was a lot of conversation between UBC and Open Secrets and other comrades, what can we do here? And at the same time, in about March of 2019, the FSCA released a new circular which is how they effectively direct the conduct of the pension fund administrators. And what that circular said was that their way in which they could see an ability to remedy what had happened in the cancellations project was that they were asking the pension fund administrators to apply to court to request the re-registration of cancelled funds. So yes, pension fund administrators often have much greater access to resources and access to lawyers and are able to go to the court. But it still isn't a very clear and very effective remedy when you're requiring conduct on the part of organizations or institutions that might well, as has been demonstrated, be benefiting from the cancellation of those funds. What Open Secrets had found also in the report that they released was that this really wasn't happening. You know, by the time around midway through 2020, I think Liberty had applied and successfully had 54 of the cancelled funds reinstated. That's of around 6,000 funds across the whole sector. And no one else, no other pension fund administrators had applied using the circular. And what UBC and Open Secrets really believed was that the FSCA is the regulator. It's their job to act in the public interest and ensure that that public interest is being met. And in this case, that means that the FSCA needed to be taking very, very clear steps to ensure that the pension fund administrators were following the procedures outlined in the circular. So we're applying to courts and getting the majority of those 6,000 cancelled funds re-registered. 54 funds was not enough. So at the end of 2021, UBC and Open Secrets launched litigation, a big case against the FSCA. Essentially, what we wanted at the time was for the FSCA to do its job, because our approach was that it wasn't properly doing its job. And in doing its job, what we were requiring was that it was negotiating with and really pushing the pension fund administrators to be taking better, quicker, clear steps, and steps that were transparent, not secretly, you know, we've never heard of this case, and then we find out 5 years later something's happened. The public needs to know, because again, part of the problem here is the lack of transparency. Again, if I don't know what fund myself or my ancestors is a member of, then I can't tell if that fund has been cancelled, if it's been reinstated, if it's still sitting unregistered somewhere. You know, so all of this must be transparent, and the oversight body there is the FSCA. So that was the plan, and all three of us here are lawyers, but I think all three of us would recognize that the law's got significant limits. And that's why an organization like UBC is so important, because no legal action is going to be ultimately successful without a strong campaign and without a social movement to work alongside. And what happened was we filed the case in December. And usually the respondent that you file a case against has about 30 working days. So give them 2 months to respond to you. The FSCA responded to us 7 months after we filed the case. And what happened was, in those 7 months, finally, the FSCA was taking steps, and what they did in their responding papers was they showed us all of the steps that they were taking to speak to different fund administrators. And so by the time those 7 months had finished and we got their responding papers, it was clear to us that the case that we launched had triggered them to do the job that they should have been doing. And so again, recognizing that the law has limits, at the time we had to acknowledge what the FSCA had done. We definitely weren't happy. We didn't think this was the end, but at least we could see that launching the case had pushed them to start those conversations, or in most instances, to start those conversations. And again, by the time that they had filed their papers, Liberty's applications had gone from 54 applications to reinstate 54 cancelled funds to I think 151 cancelled funds. Again, 151 of 6,000, but at least it's a start. And so what we did was we reached a settlement agreement at the time with the FSCA, basically saying to them, we can see that us launching litigation kind of lit the fire under your bum and caused you to start doing what you need to do. But this is not the end. This is very much the beginning. And so we reached the settlement agreement in September of 2022. And kind of what we said to them at the time was, thank you for starting this. We'll continue watching you. And as Rosemary said, and anyone is welcome to correct me, but as far as I know, no other funds have since then been applied for, and our comrades from Liberty can correct me if I'm wrong, but been re-registered. And so again, it's an indication not only that the pension fund administrators are not doing enough, but also that our regulator is not doing enough to act in the public interest. And that at least in respect of the cancellations project and those funds that were cancelled there and the effects of that project, that we're largely still in the same place that we've been for at least 15 years, with the same effects that have been felt since at least the 70s and 80s.
Thanks. Just two brief points bouncing off what Anna said. If you sit back and think about it, who holds funds? Who has the power to hold funds to account? If a fund isn't doing what it's supposed to do, who do you have? You have the regulator. We've just heard what it does and doesn't do. Who else? Members. Oh, you need money, resources, access to courts, lawyers, etc. Not practical. Maybe now and then, if you're quick, you can get into the adjudicator, but that's very limited. And civil society. That's it. And organizations like UBC and Open Secrets were around in the 70s and 80s. And even then, I mean, NGOs' resources are also limited, human and financial. So you can see that the context is there isn't really sufficient people holding or able to hold funds to account to do a proper job. And so the pressure on the regulator to do its job, I think, was a great starting point. But when you have such few people in doing the checks and balances, a lot is going to be left unaddressed. And the other thing to bear in mind, and I think it's been touched on, is time makes things worse in respect of unpaid benefits. I'm sure all the comrades here have experienced this personally. What do you have over decades later? You have evidence problems. The fund says, there's no member record. This person wasn't here. Now the employer has been liquidated already 10 years ago, and you can't go back to the employer. You can't, I mean, if your fund says there's very limited options that you can do to force a fund to go and look better, right? So memories fade, because remember, evidence that you were a member of the fund is not just documents, but documents can be useful. It's also you can go on oath, and that's also evidence. You can debate how important it is or not. You can say, I went to this mine with this employer with these 3 colleagues who also did affidavits, for example, that we worked together at the same place. I was an employer at mine A, and mine A had a particular pension fund that everyone had to belong to, so I must have been a member of that fund. But it's very roundabout, as you can already hear. You also have legal problems, because people will argue that claims have prescribed, although hopefully it is important for me to speak about it tomorrow, about how to address some of the problems. That's not cast in stone, nothing expires after 3 years, but we'll return to that. So, time just sits on top of all these other structural and behavioral issues and makes things worse. So you also have the member who's passed on, now the wife or the child is maybe in another country, or maybe only an adult later in time, and you're trying to piece together the history. So I think the message is when you engage with people seeking to claim funds or to get their unpaid benefits, is to act as quickly as possible. It helps preserve evidence.
I'm just going to mention one thing about these funds that were deregistered. Sometimes former members of those funds have gone to the pension fund adjudicator to complain that they have not been able to get their benefits. And the adjudicator has said, I cannot hear cases with deregistered funds. You have to have those funds registered again, because I don't have jurisdiction over deregistered funds. So that is horrific. As a former member, you can't even go through that cheap dispute resolution mechanism that was established to help people to have their disputes around retirement funds resolved. So that's an important point. It also, Dale, I don't know if you want to about discussion from the floor, or can I start talking about the CA's discussion table and ideas for how this might be resolved? I must say, I'm looking forward to Dr. Reed's from the Department of Health, what they have done a lot already.
Okay, comrades, I'm going to give 30 seconds for people to check their cell phones right now, pull them out, and put mute on there, or turn them off. If you haven't done so, please do so now. Thank you. Okay, comrades, I think what we'll do now is we will engage some conversation, questions, comments with what has been presented, and then we'll come back, and I think you can address that a little later. So the floor is open, comrades. This is for any question, something that's not clear, something that has been said that you want to respond to, something that you want to contribute in terms of what has been said. Okay. I'll recognize you as you put your hands up. And please identify yourself.
I'm Vincent, my cell phone is on.
Okay.
Very bullied the Department of Health to the president. Thank you for that. That's a practical example in terms of your simplified diagram. And I'm a miner, I'm not scared to identify myself as an ex-miner and currently paid by the Minerals Council to assist with the legacy issues. So I'm not hiding behind your Kool-Aid. Rosemary, just as an example of the mining industry's fund, the Provident Fund, and an old demutualization exercise of Old Mutual.
Right.
The amount of money in that little arrow of yours is 103 million unallocated, unpaid.
Who's got it? It's Old Mutual.
I'm not here to shame and blame them. I'm just sharing with you that your simplified diagram is real, and it's only us that can assist to bring justice to those families. That's all for starters. Thanks.
Okay, it's quite incredible, comment. If you just stop and think about it. We've just told that there's another 100 million sitting there. It's almost like small change, huh? 100 million bucks sitting there all the time. Okay. I want people, just please put your hands up for those who want to talk, and then I can identify. So 1, 2, 3. Anyone else on that side? 4. Okay, those 4 will take in.
Dale, can I say one thing
Oh,
just
please.
to remind
Okay.
everyone?
Yes.
So that 100 million, just because it's unallocated, doesn't mean that the fund manager or the pension fund administrator is not earning monthly fees of that money. So this is why it is not in the pension fund administrator's interest to, unless they're acting in the public interest, which they're not, to ensure that those injustices are remedied.
Hello, my name is Simon Mashang from Ewolen, UBC. I just want to ask, I understand that Liberty is the only administrator which avail themselves. If maybe your administrator was maybe Momentum or Alexander Hope, so will Liberty assist you maybe to track down if ever you've got money in Alexander Hope or in Momentum? Are they going to, can they assist you checking where lose money?
I don't think that sorry, this is one. I don't think that Liberty has access to the records held by Momentum for the funds under their administration. So I doubt that they can help you. They might be able to help you look up on the FSCA website. You know, that's a starting point. But UBC people also have been trained on how to do that, to see if maybe there's a sign that you've got a benefit. But Liberty can't tell you if there's money for you at Old Mutual or at Momentum or somewhere else, which is one of the reasons why we should have had 15 years ago already a database of all of this information. It's extraordinary that this was proposed to National Treasury 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and it is discussed in the National Treasury, sorry, the FSCA discussion paper. But it's just not happening.
So it means that if the other administrators doesn't avail themselves, it means it's going to take long before we can get if they doesn't avail themselves.
It could be. And that's why sometimes you need to go in toy tricks and it makes things happen.
Yeah, that is our struggle, comrades, to get them to listen.
Thank you very much, Mutual Masu, for the subject. So I just wanted to check I mean, you pointed out that, I think it's earlier, you pointed out that the FSCA released a circular in which it said you can find this administrators, managers, can actually go to apply to court to have this fund reinstated. And it seemed to me that it was not an imposition, it left it at their own discretion if they wanted. They wanted you to maybe clarify why is it that the FSCA is not imposing as a regulator, telling them that let's reinstate this fund so that kids. That's point number one. But point number two, it seems that you said, if I heard it correctly, that it was only Liberty that has thus far like also had this fund reinstated. And I wanted to check, you said that there may be a conflict of interest, but there is a conflict of interest, but it's not in the interest, it is of when unscrupulous fund managed to go and reinstate this fund. Why is that? Where is the conflict of interest?
Okay. You guys, we'll just address these as they're asked. Noted, coming.
Yeah, so firstly, the point of our litigation at the time was to say to the FSCA, you've released the circular, you've made it effectively voluntary, you've put it into the hands of the pension fund administrators, and you're not doing your job to ensure that they go ahead and do this. So that was the point of the litigation. I don't know if you might speak a bit more on why they elected that route rather than compelling the pension fund administrators to do so. But just on your second question about why it's not in their interest. So firstly, it's improper that it should only be in the hands of the pension fund administrators to reinstate what we believe were unlawfully cancelled funds. And there should be other options to what extent those are available. But also having left it in their hands, the reason that I would believe that it's a conflict of interest is because if the idea is ultimately to re-register the pension fund so that you're able to find the members or their beneficiaries, then ultimately if you're then dispersing the funds once you found them, there's a smaller pot of money for the pension fund administrator to draw its fees off. So in that respect, it can be a serious conflict of interest.
If I can just mention about the conflict, Mrs. Woody.
Yes.
I'm sorry, about the position of the regulator. A few years ago, there was a commission of inquiry in Australia about the financial services industry there. There were a whole lot of scandals involving banks, insurance companies, pension funds. So they got a judge, it was a bit like the Zondo Commission here. and they had this judge hearing evidence about the way the financial services industry was being run and regulated in Australia, and there were some YouTube videos of this. And what was fascinating was when I saw one YouTube video of somebody from the regulators being asked, why didn't you issue orders? Why didn't you take away somebody's license? Why didn't you use all these different powers that you have to force these administrators, insurance companies, banks, all that are being regulated by you? Why didn't you use your powers? Take them to court, put them under curatorship. You're regulating them. And the person who was representing one of the regulators in Australia, she said, we like to do things more in a more collegial manner. We like to have meetings and be gentle and discuss. And the judge was saying, no, you must go to court, and then once you got your order, then you can be gentle. But he didn't. He was as cross and perplexed as I often felt. That our regulators have these powers, but as was shown in that commissioned inquiry, often people work for the regulator and then get off, they go and start working for an administrator because the administrator likes to employ people who work for the regulator. Sometimes people who work for a financial services provider then come and work for the regulator, but they've still got friends. And so what you have is this very, in many cases, a kind of warm relationship. There's a revolving door, people going in and out to the industry, coming back to the regulator. And that is what people often call a captured regulator, where the relationships are a little bit too sweet. I have to be honest, I think that the FSB was very much like that. The FSCA, I think, is getting better. They're getting more effective. But I still think they're not, they often going after the smaller fish, and there's still a lot more they could be doing. And one of the things that really bugs me is that the FSCA often exempts funds from doing things that, like funds can transfer unpaid benefits from the main fund to an unpaid benefits fund. They're not required to have this transfer under subject to scrutiny under Section 14 of the Pension Funds Act. So the regulator is saying, I do have a power to check that everything is right, but I'm going to exempt you because it's expensive or hassle or something like that. And so there you have a regulator not doing what it's supposed to do. And because it's unpaid benefit money, it's the most vulnerable people because there's nobody there to check for the beneficiaries. Not even the regulator wants to know whether there's a fair amount of money being transferred, that the records are being transferred, all the things that should be checked, and that's not happening. So I think there's, the FSCA is much better than the FSB was, but there's still a lot to do to be improved.
Just on the point of the regulator not doing its job as properly as it's required to do, I don't know if some of you may recall from memory the Borpello Beneficiary Fund debacle. I was involved in litigation on that, but it was also such a demoralizing engagement to see what the FSCA was not doing under its new guise. What happened there was the Transport Fund and other funds, big ones like Anglo funds, were when there's death benefits that were for minor children or other beneficiaries, they would pay it not to that individual but to a beneficiary fund, to a separate beneficiary fund. That was called the Borpello Beneficiary Fund. That fund also governed like a pension fund by a board of trustees and so forth with service providers, then has to pay regular money. And so, for example, the grandmother of the 6-year-old child who's the beneficiary will write to the fund and say, so-and-so needs extra money this month for school fees. And then they might draw down more. So it's spread out the benefit over the child, the rest of the child's minor life until they get to 18, for the most part. A lot of that, for many, many reasons, some of which are not in the public record or not clear yet, a lot of the fund's money was held by our favorite bank, BBS. So when the BBS scandal happened, that fund immediately lost 70% of its assets. And these were monies for the children of deceased truck drivers and mine workers, also vulnerable. The FSCA then appoints a curator who attempts to start to work on what this mess is and what is recoverable or not. we litigated on behalf of the Transport Fund, saying, because we were looking at the curator reports as they're coming in, and they're on, I think they must still be on the FSCA website. So every few months he does a report on the prospects of recovering any of this. But what he also continues to do, I mean, don't think people really got money back from VDS. So fine, you're now left with 30%. What are you doing with the 30% that you have left? No, the curator allowed and instructed benefits to continue to be paid out as per normal, which meant if you're 17 and you were entitled to your full value, you got your full value. But if you're 2 years old, you get your full value. But now I think you can't pay 100% claims from 30% money. So the younger kids especially were losing out because you were taking their money in order to fully pay everyone's claims for the next few months. And we were trying to go to court to stop this, to say you must at least pay proportional to the money you have left. And to this day, I've not seen evidence. The matter, we had a fight about whether we were entitled to bring that case, whether we had standing, and lost, and appealed that to the SCA. Ultimately, it settled. I think the fund lost a bit of appetite for continuing to fight with the regulator. And then eventually they changed their behavior. But that was a few weeks before the SCA hearing, the Supreme Court of Appeal. So it's also an example of litigation which eventually forces behavioral change, but also from a regulator who has not been doing what it's required to do. And one of the worst parts that links to Rose's Section 14 example that she mentions is with a beneficiary fund, you don't, but when you transfer money, I've seen no evidence through the litigation record that the affected beneficiaries and their caregivers were aware of any of this. No correspondence, no information. They probably think everything is fine, maybe still today. So it just shows the gravity of the problem and the various people tasked with fixing it are not doing it.
So that's a story of a different kind of state capture programs. Yeah? So it's not just a family capturing the president, it's financial institutions capturing government institutions. Number 3. Yeah, note your comment.
Though I do have several questions. I'll limit them to 2. I'm Diaz Malapena from the bar. My question is, when these small funds are transferring money into the fund, does umbrella fund have people trustees?
Yeah.
And if they do have trustees, how are they being appointed in the umbrella fund? What are they saying about whatever money is left in the small funds, these trustees? Because that's their responsibility for sharing responsibility. And on that of the registered funds, I just want to know what legal can be done to force whoever needs to be forced to restore them. Because the funds are there. Who is going to be forced really to restore them? Is it the company or who is supposed to be forced?
Okay. Address that.
Firstly, on the umbrella funds. Umbrella funds are usually, normal in-house funds for employers. You have to give members the right to elect at least 50% of the trustees, and the employer usually appoints the other 50%. But for umbrella funds, unclaimed benefit funds, beneficiary funds, preservation funds, and retirement annuity funds, they usually get exemption because umbrella funds, some of them have got 2 million members all across the country, and they say it would be too expensive and difficult to try and run an election. and the members wouldn't know who's standing for election anyway. And obviously, with beneficiary funds, it's children, so they wouldn't know who to vote for, and unclaimed benefit funds, well, they don't know where their members are. So they give them an exemption. So it's usually the organisation that started that fund. So if it was started by a financial services provider, that financial services provider would appoint the trustees. And they're supposed to appoint at least one or two now, independent trustees. But there's always a question about whether they're really independent, if they're making a lot of money from getting these appointments. But anyway, yeah, I've never seen a situation where an umbrella fund fires the administrator that appointed it. And looks for better services. But that's another long story to talk about. But the trustees of the new fund don't have responsibility for the old fund. They are told that you're getting these members and these assets to put in your fund to provide for a benefit payable by your fund when they retire or die. So they don't always look into what happened in the old fund, because that was the trustees of the old fund were supposed to be checking. But most trustees of these in-house funds, they are lay people like you and me. They're not trained to look out for what issues, what problems could happen. The last question was about what can be legally done to force whoever's responsible to reinstate these funds. I just want to say one thing. We can't say that all those funds had assets and liabilities. When I was litigating, I was concerned with about 4,500 funds because they didn't have trustees. It wasn't trustees who asked for them to be deregistered. It was, not elected and appointed trustees. It was usually a person, sort of paid trustee that the FSCA or FSB as it was used to appoint, or somebody from the fund administrator. They would send in certificates saying that these funds have no assets and liabilities. So there wasn't a board of trustees of the normal kind. And so those are the ones I was concerned about. You often have cases where there's a board of trustees and they do transfer all the assets and the liabilities. They check that everything's sorted, and then they ask the registrar to deregister the FSCA to deregister the funds. And those cases are fine. So it may be that of those 4,500, many of them, even if they didn't have trustees, they had no assets and liabilities. What my litigation was about was that I asked the court to order them to investigate every single one, because we found quite a few. Some of my colleagues and I in the FSB found quite a few cases where there had been assets and liabilities, and our colleagues who had been responsible for checking and signing off, deregistering them, had not been doing their jobs. But like happened with Ariel's case, or the Open Secrets case, in my case, they had done a preliminary investigation of a few funds. KPMG had been brought in. KPMG said, yeah, they looked at 500 funds, and there were quite a few funds that still had assets and liabilities but had been deregistered. And that was the basis on which I went to court to say they must investigate all of them. And the FSCA started, after I started the litigation, they appointed Jonathan Morton and some other people to investigate more funds. And so when it finally got to court, the court said, yeah, but the FSCA is investigating. And I was saying, well, we've seen some of the original reports by this investigator, and he's saying, well, the money's still there, so nobody's prejudiced. But that wasn't an answer. These funds had nobody trying to find, to deal with the funds as pension funds should do. And the fact that there's money there belonging to people is a sign that this process was prejudicial. But it's not necessary to go to court to have every fund reinstated. What the judge who wrote the Constitutional Court judgment said was that I should have asked the court to order that all these funds be reinstated, and then the other side would have to bring all the papers and documents. We'd have like 15 trucks, Pantechnicon trucks of paper going to court. That was crazy. I was just saying, order them to properly investigate in an independent way so we know which funds had assets and liabilities, and then those funds can get reinstated. You don't have to reinstate 4,500 funds. That would be crazy. But unfortunately, the court said, we have to believe that the FSCA, the FSB then, is acting in good faith and investigating. We're not going to tell it what to do. And that was the end of my case. But so what can you do now? Well, Open Secrets tried. Obviously, I had tried. Perhaps if there's a group of people who know a particular fund and know that there are assets still there, then you can bring an application to, there are all kinds of things. You'll have to talk to Ariel about that. But to simply ask the FSCA for an order telling the FSCA to do its job Sometimes the courts just don't want to tell the regulator what to do, or government entity. They sometimes are a bit deferential.
Anything? Okay. I've noted the hand there. Moses.
Thanks, Moses Tulo, UBC. I thought I had some relief when my comrade said he's from the bar. Now I'm from Sibuke. my take was also on what Comrade Rose spoke about. Those I was a trustee at African Cables. They were run by Sanlam. And as a trustee, I had every other information flowing from what we call. And the company now changed to have what we call retirement online.
That's an umbrella fund.
Yes, it's an umbrella fund. When they brought in the retirement online, I was no longer a trustee. I was made to be one of they call it management committee. Right. Now, in the management committee, Comrade Rose, this is what happened. We'll call in, we'll have a nice package coming in. They're showing that respect for you. What I'm saying, respect in there. And then all the things will be discussed, and then the trustee that end. And I want to point out another error that I found. The new trustee was being paid, the one that is sought by the retirement online. We're doing it gratis.
Yeah.
Right, that's what we did. But I still see that all the interviews, if there was a death, if there was anything, were conducted by me. Well, I was not only the only trustee. There were other guys who were trustees from the provident fund and pension fund, but we were all part of the management. So we're representing the workers. Now it was difficult. Like now we have this two-court system. It was so difficult. Where do you find the time to give information to the worker? Now, if there are any other thing, you have to do it. They were even gracious to me that if the one guy was sick, they would provide the transport. I used to go to their homes and see the situation. But Comrade Rose, this is what is happening. And this is the problem that we are getting. With umbrella funds, you just have no right as the members of the fund. So it's run like that. It's run like a mafia, if I may put it. I strongly believe it. They deny these people their right to the fund. Now, let me stop short and give others a chance to say. But my take is that I look into the very picture that you put in terms of the fund and the insurance and that. Now with insurance, it was just total limit to information to the members. To such an extent, I still meet people in the street and say, oh, by the way, you were, they don't even see that our position has changed. We're no longer trustees. They meet me now, 20 years.
And they want you to explain.
And they say, by the way, when you were a trustee, what were you representing right now? It sort of at other times create enemies for people to say you screwed us up when you were a trustee. But I'm raising this because there's so lot of things and perhaps into another section where we'll talk of the way forward. Just to advise people, because they get enticed into this system and they get these new terms like the retirement online. And as soon as you want to act, because what triggered me to say this is that can those people of retirement online fight the employer? Obviously, no. So it means the worker or the beneficiary is doomed. Thank you.
Just a reminder, comrades, that in the sessions that we're going to have tomorrow, we're going to be talking about consequences.
Yeah.
A lot of the consequences, which are something that Comrade Moses is getting into now, which is fine. But what results as a result of what has been presented today. So, as we say, we'll definitely have many opportunities to share those stories. I saw another hand here. Did anybody want to just respond quickly?
Sorry, just about Moses' story and umbrella funds. I just want to just remind you that umbrella funds are not only established by financial services providers. Trade unions often establish umbrella funds. They are, what do they call them? Various industry associations that establish them. They're all different kinds of umbrella funds. I've just been advising a client where the union has been pushing really hard that this mining company put their employees in this umbrella fund. Did some investigation. It turns out that from every contribution, 10 Rand is taken off for administration, another 10 Rand to go straight to the union. And so there was, it's not just the commercial funds that are problematic. And what we do need is some law change around how the governance and how people get appointed and elected and how they can be held accountable. But that's not really the whole subject here. But it is important just to remember that it's very widespread. Conflicts of interest are huge.
Someone else? Okay.
The name is Ramona. I'm Shakir, UBC. I think about a few weeks ago, it was on social media that about 2% of companies they pay back to the administrators. Letting people which are who that they know that some of the calculated to the fund, but the company is paid to submit to the administrator. So, in absence of the FSA regulator, I would like the panel to advise the SUBC, because we are ready to take the move at its horse. So, we are ready to take the move at its horse. So, I'd like the panel to advise SUBC that what we do, because the method we get, that it is. No action was taken from the regulator for the family centers because there is the responsibility to ensure that the company do pay those conditions that they desire to use their employees. So that the panel to advise us to this. What steps should we take to free the regulator? Because the responsibility of the regulator to ensure that the family center will be available. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's on.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's interesting to have seen through the news when Two-Pot started, was it 1 September? Suddenly people were looking at their retirement savings earlier than they normally would. Normally people look close to retirement and they suddenly then realize when it's too late. There's all sorts of problems with it. So I think it's been one of the good consequences coming out of Two-Pot becoming effective is that people are actually looking at their savings earlier, and that at least is a good sign. To your question, look, I don't know to what if UBC wants to be involved with career contributions, which might be separate from unpaid benefits. I think there needs to be an in-principle discussion about that. If there's a specific example of affected employees, you can discuss with pension justice and we can see what we can do. If it's within 3 years, you can quickly go to the adjudicator, the members themselves can complain. But it is, and many funds do litigate for arrear contributions. But of course, many are overlooked. So I have a few client funds that take the view that their fiduciary duties for them, remember I said fiduciary duties, you have to debate about what exactly is its content. But some funds take the view that part of my fiduciary duty is to sue the employer for the arrears. And other funds take the view that that goes a bit too far. The FSCA, unfortunately, I don't think is the solution. That it has a number of times said they're not a debt collector. They're involved in this process. So it falls on funds and it falls on members and employees to actually pay attention to whether those contributions do land with the fund and the trustees to sue. And it will have to be taken on an individual basis by those people and maybe civil society.
Just to be fair, I want to say that in this conduct standard, this issue, they have said that funds, or in other regulatory instances, they've said that funds need to collect the cell phone numbers of all their members and tell those members. So what's happening when your employer has not paid its contributions? And the point of that is so that the workers who are still employed can go along and protest against their employer. I haven't heard if that's been happening. But that is a good thing, and I think we need to give credit where it's due. The FSCA has also been public with the names of funds, of employers that have been failing to pay because they've been requiring the administrators and funds to submit information about which employers are not paying their contributions. But one of the big structural problems that I have is that the biggest problems are with the security funds, the private security for the guards. They are forced to belong to this fund. We know that security guards earn very little money, but they're forced to belong to a fund that has to spend a huge amount of money on legal fees to sue employers. And frankly, they shouldn't have established this fund in the first place because it's taking food off the table. You know, if I was a security guard, I would rather make sure that my children are eating properly and hope they look after me in retirement. There are some people, you should not be forcing them to belong to a retirement fund, especially one like that, the security company starts, then they lose the contract, they close down, they've taken the members' money, but they've never paid it across to the fund. And then you have to go and look for another job for another security company. The administration of all this churn is costing way too much money. And as a matter of policy, personally, I think they shouldn't force people to belong to that fund. I think it's unfair and it's wasting their money. But and it's another, what's the other one? Main conflict. But I do think if members are getting information early, if the funds are complying with that directive thing, they must tell the member when the employer hasn't paid. That at least is a big step forward.
Okay. We are having very powerful from Western Cape Expert. What is something that we can help us in order for government to give us our benefit. Because in Western Cape, 2016, the first government elected a committee was called Interdepartmental Task Team, was bringing in Parliament to the Portfolio Committee. So, when the first government, he called the conference like this with the stakeholders, all the trustees. They promised us they are going to make one stop in order to pay all the people their benefit. Unfortunately, they delayed those process up until COVID-19, where we did this story. They didn't give us feedback from what they promised us. So if we don't force this new government, because not the previous government who was
corrupt. So I hope this new government can do better. Thanks, man.
I wanted to throw in two questions here. One is, what has been the role of the Treasury? The Treasury, as far as we understand it, is the mother body of the FSCA, essentially. And the Treasury is the overseer, fundamentally. So if any light can be shed on the Treasury, given the fact that the Department of Treasury has been central to so much issues around state capture, you remember, and other kinds of things, I think it would be interesting. The second question is what, if any, role has been played by union investment companies? Because when union investment companies were established in the late 1990s, most of them were seeded by pension funds, by workers' pensions. And those were then invested on the stock exchange and in everything, and made billionaires, by the way, of Johnny Copeland, who was the ex-general secretary of the SOC2, Marcel Golding, who was deputy general secretary of the National Union of Mine Workers, a billionaire, owns ENCA, owns a whole range of other things. We're on workers' money. So I'm wondering, and many unions, many unions have been torn apart as a result of fights over this money and people making themselves wealthy. You see union officials driving around in very expensive cars and living in mansions while workers are losing their jobs. So I'm wondering whether or not that has played any part in this crisis as a cause at unions, because sometimes when we get together, we tend to be a little bit cautious about talking about unions. And because there's a sensitivity there. But I think maybe any reflections there would be welcome.
The National Treasury has a section that is responsible for formulating policy for the financial sector. And they propose legislation to Parliament around. They drafted legislation to establish, for example, a national unclaimed benefit fund. And any other proposals, they've driven the two-part legislation. By the way, I must say that is, I was approached at the beginning of COVID to advise a trade union about whether its members who had not lost their jobs due to COVID but weren't getting paid their salaries, as they were away, they didn't get access to some of their pension money. And so we made representations and did all these things, and Treasury just sat on its hands for a long time, not interested. And then it got this idea that, all right, we let them have access to 1/3, then we can lock up the rest until retirement. They can't take it out. And so eventually they did that deal, and Nederland, it became legislation. Now we've got the two-part system. And it was supposed to be, this thing about access was supposed to be for emergencies. Now if you feel like you want to take money out to buy a car or do whatever. So I'm a bit disappointed in the outcome. The Treasury took a very long time. But on this thing about unclaimed benefits, there's been issues around retirement reform, and then one of the problems with driving retirement reform in many ways is that there's been a big fight between National Treasury and the Department of Social Development over the years, for the last 10 years or so. And in fact, I think I was involved working as a consultant to National Treasury when they put out a discussion paper in 2004. 2006, the Department of Social Development puts out another discussion paper saying, yeah, we need to have a one big social security fund. It's crazy. And I thought this was actually quite a good idea in some ways, but it's crazy to have a road accident fund and an unemployment insurance fund and all these things. Why not have a big social security fund that everybody must belong to? And that we can cut some of the costs from the middle persons, whatever it is. But there was big pushback from National Treasury, but National Treasury put out another discussion paper in 2007. There's been this ding dong. You might remember a couple of years ago, National Department of Social Development put out a green paper, I think, and then had to withdraw it because there was huge fight in cabinet. National Treasury was apparently telling them, yeah, who the hell are you to suggest policy? So that's been one of the problems, is there's been this warfare about who's responsible. Because if you think about it, a lot of pension fund pension funds are in fact subsidized through tax because they don't have to pay income tax on their investment returns. There's favorable tax treatment of contributions and benefits and so on. So that's where the state subsidizes our investments in retirement funds. So even the courts have recognized there are vehicles for the delivery of social security. One way you get access to social security is by belonging to a retirement fund. So that's why the Department of Social Development says, but we are the custodians of social security. And National Treasury is saying, but we are custodians of the financial sector. So what we really need, and I think it's one of the problems we have around the proposals of the National Unclaimed Benefit Fund, is they only did, National Treasury is suggesting it only in relation to the financial sector. They're not even trying to include Dr. Boerse's fund to be part of this. And so there's a lot of short-sightedness. I must say that when I took the FSCA to court, I had to cite the Minister of Finance because he had appointed me as Deputy Registrar, and boy, did they bring out the guns. They did not like me, and they fought me all the way up to the Constitutional Court. That was very disappointing. I thought Treasury would be concerned. National Treasury would be concerned about all these funds that were getting deregistered. But they thought I was causing disharmony and making people scared about putting money into pension funds, which wasn't true. But anyway, that is a worry. And hopefully, somehow they're going to have to get past each other and find a way to work with other government departments, other bodies, and to try and find some sort of constructive solution to a lot of these problems we've been talking about could be addressed through legislation, and maybe we'll discuss that tomorrow.
Anyone else?
Maybe just a brief comment on the union side of things. I don't think that the investment companies themselves have really directly contributed. It would be more the case of where the fund was administered by a union organization, or ministries were union linked to the unions, where the issues of member record keeping and so on is more on front board and on administrative level. The issue with the asset manager is the fee interest side of it. But it's less about taking active steps to find members to handle the interest. I think there's a few funds who have, a few unions who have started their own. I know AMCU started a fund recently-ish, two or so years ago. Igula. Yeah, I'm not sure where it is right now, but that might change the picture a bit. I was involved in a fight between two pension funds trying to keep an employer in one country on sponsorship. And in the process of it, Igula was one of the potential contenders. But long story short, there was comparison of costs. There is umbrella funds, including Igula, which came out pretty expensive. So that might indirectly contribute to problems, but I don't know if that's changed.
Let me have 10 participating for time. Not going anywhere.
Yep.
I'm still my name is Joe, from the Department of Justice and Peace. From this, I took out the coordinates 1971. We talk about people normal out. At least I got something out of this 1971. They said we are 7,700. Whereas we have to share 146 million. Now I don't know why is the shame of money. Take our money, take it to Alexander Forbes, to the Financial Service Board there. Why can't they put our money into the bank so we can get it? This is not a fight, it's like a war. Because people are from Cape Town, people know the idea. And the children are struggling. Our colleagues are there. The women are suffering. Like me at home there. I put 500 just to never receive this money. I think I was lucky because I just take a piece of paper and apply to Mr. Kenny Kosi
People are traveling from Jericho, they come to Victoria, and they put it into Alexander Falls. From there, it's a dead end. I think now the chairman of Mali make a U-turn, bring our money back and display this money to the owners. Other things about the business and this thing I'm going to touch it tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Any other questions? Okay.
Different peers speaking from Evergreen. Comrade Rose, I'm appealing actually, since I hear people complaining about mines and that they're not paid. Who can do us a list accordingly, names of different mines, and tell us this mine belongs to this administrator, this, because when we fill forms, we submit one administrator that response. Then after that, no response.
Sorry, I prepared such a list for Mr. Dr. Boyce a couple of years ago, I think. A spreadsheet. There is a list of all these retirement funds on the FSCA website. I just looked for funds that had the words mine, mines, colliery, anything that looked like a mine. And then it listed funds. I tried to find funds for the names like that and listed who the administrator was. So I can see if I can find those and send them to you. But it might be out of some of those funds are already deregistered. But if you see the administrator, you can ask the administrator, where did that money go to? So that's the best we could do there.
Okay. Anyone else? Last chance. Okay. Comments, thank you very much for that. For your questions, your comments, thank you to all the panelists for providing us with insights into the different causes of this crisis, and then answering and engaging in the questions and the comments that were made. Yeah, thanks very much. Let's give Matt. Okay. Yeah, you can make a move if you want. Perfect.